Today, I'm joined by Farella senior paralegal Joe Hilliard to discuss the 1987 movie RoboCop. Joe and I discussed the basic features of a corporation, common corporate roles, and certain compliance filings with the Secretary of State and under the Corporate Transparency Act. Does Omni Consumer Products have to update its BOI report following the death of Dick Jones? Why can't RoboCop walk faster? We talk about these questions and more, so let's jump in. 'Cause dead or alive, you're coming with me. Welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. I'm Hans Young, a family wealth partner at Farella. Through this podcast, my guests and I will provide an entertaining look at family wealth and estate planning topics through well-known Hollywood movies. Each episode will focus on a single movie as we discuss fun facts, review our favorite scenes, and engage in thought-provoking discussions of real-world legal issues. And lastly, do you agree with our verdict? Is the movie a guilty pleasure or just not guilty? Again, welcome to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film. I'm excited to have my colleague, Joe Hilliard, as my guest on the podcast today. Joe is a senior paralegal at Farella. He specializes in formation and compliance matters for all types of entities, and in particular, 501c3 tax-exempt organizations. Prior to joining Farella, Joe worked in-house for several real estate development and management companies in Southern California, working on real estate purchases and vendor contracting. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Hans. It's great to be here this morning.
We've been talking about this for a while now, and I feel like we're here, we're going to do this, and you and I work together a lot. A lot of that work involves formation and transactional documents as well as compliance for closely held legal entities, which are owned by our high net worth and ultra high net worth family wealth clients. So when we were initially talking, I wanted to find a movie that would highlight some of the compliance issues we encounter. We discovered we both love movies, actually, including action and sci-fi movies from the 1980s and 90s. I suggested RoboCop from 1987.
I jumped all over it.
Yeah, I think your exact reaction was, I'd buy that for $1.
Exactly.
And here we are. So we have lots to cover, and let's get started with some fun facts about the movie. So the movie released on July 17th, 1987, so quite a while ago. It grossed $53.4 million on a budget of $13.7 million, largely considered a box office success. It was directed by Paul Verhoeven, who is known for his extremely violent yet intelligent science fiction movies. RoboCop is one of them, of course. Total Recall is another with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that was 1990. I think he also did Starship Troopers and Basic Instinct. I watched RoboCop as a young kid. Having rewatched it now as an adult, it scares me to even say that because it was completely inappropriate for my age. But it left an impression on me, or perhaps it scarred me permanently because I had a RoboCop video game. I had a toy gun that kind of resembled the one that RoboCop uses. I feel like when I think back on my childhood, it was certainly a piece of that. It's not as big as some of the other franchises, I think, but certainly a piece of it. I didn't really rewatch it again until I was preparing for this podcast. Maybe I'd seen it or bits and pieces of it a little bit as an adult, but really I didn't watch it again until recently. I got to say, the violence was much more extreme than I'd remembered. Right. I mean, the deaths of Murphy, Mr. Kinney, Boddicker.
Yes, all of them. Yes.
All of them, yeah.
Since we can talk about that, well, with our fun facts with Paul Verhoeven, who's obviously no stranger to controversy. This is one of his first movies that got him in trouble here in the United States, and it was given an X rating specifically for the death of Mr. Kinney, where the Ed 209 continues to blow him up, and I don't remember how much, 10, 12 seconds were cut of like pieces flying across the boardroom table to get an R rating. And I think what horrifies you now is, for the most part, what you see on cable now is the original unrated version that has that extra Kinney oomph, for want of a better phrase for that. And I mean, I can remember that being a big issue. I was a teenager in high school in 1987 when it came out. And I can remember actually my buddy had just turned 17 in July, about 2 weeks before that, and I was not yet 17. And they actually ID'd us to get in, and they kind of had to sneak around and find another theater that would let us in without IDing us to see an R-rated movie, which is basically unheard of nowadays, but it was kind of a big deal there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've read that, some describe Verhoeven's style as sort of over-the-top, cartoonish violence. I didn't actually think so. I mean, when I think of that or I hear that, I sort of think of Kill Bill or something like that, where it's it's very clearly meant to be gratuitous, but in a way that almost doesn't feel real. Watching Kinney get shot up felt pretty real. I mean,
yeah, and then the punch immediately after that with Peter Weller as Murphy, where it seems like a real gangland execution. It doesn't seem like a cartoony what's out that summer. It's not Rambo that's out that summer, certainly. Right. No.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that was my exposure to it, again, at a very young age. And I think you mentioned it, you were a teenager, but I was going to ask you, what were your memories of it? You saw it when you were a teenager. I mean, did it clearly, or did it leave an impression on you? What are your memories of it in terms of the impact it had on your life?
It was one of those where this is the old days again, where things weren't very easily available. And I'm pretty sure we bootlegged a video from somebody in downtown LA to have a copy, and we would watch it, like Blade Runner, like science fiction movies incessantly after work. You would just rewind the tape, or after school, rewind the tape, watch it over and over again. So it'd be on like 3 or 4 times, like every day after when you were at home watching homework on the old VCR. And I think I told you this, and it was the line I used too. My old college roommate, who's 3 time zones away from me, I said, "Hey, I'm watching RoboCop," when I was prepping for this to watch it again. And within 30 seconds from 3 time zones away, the same thing. I'd buy that for $1. So, I mean, there was no blank at all. It was like, immediately there's this visceral thing, lines like that. My buddies would go, my other buddy that I went to high school with, what's the other line in there? I'm a repeat offender. I will offend again. That we would do that all the time when we were in trouble in high school to the teachers. And so I think on that level, it had that sort of, at that time, you're always a teenager and hit things, but it had a lot of that cachet of like quirky lines that you could say that, yes, even with a lot of the language, there was like, quirks, I can say this and get away with it. Everybody knew what you meant. So it was kind of this zeitgeist of thing there of like, this is cool. This is science fiction. And, it's at that period of like this flash of corporation, the anti-corporation science fiction. I mean, you've got Aliens the year before where the corporation's the bad guy. You've got RoboCop here where OmniCorp is the bad guy. The summer after this, you're going to have John Carpenter's They Live, where the government is co-opted by aliens and they're all out to get you. It's this whole kind of, and it tied into like this kind of paranoid, we're all doomed 80s. There's still the Russians and stuff. We're going to be nuked. And it really hit that. And really for us as kids was an awesome feeling of like, this understands where we're at.
Yeah. Sci-fi movies, as you mentioned, a lot of them were taking off at that time. The genre itself wasn't as robust as it is, I think, today. So Orion Pictures kind of took a chance on the movie, and it clearly paid off, right? RoboCop led to 2 movie sequels, 2 cartoon series, a television show, several comic book series, and then they rebooted the film in 2014. I did watch that one just to say I watched it, but it didn't hit the same way as the original.
I watched the trailer again when we were doing this because I remembered not seeing it in the theater, and I'm like, got a great supporting cast and yet no desire to watch it. When I saw the trailer, I was like, oh my God.
It didn't feel the same. And clearly they never thought to do a sequel to that one. So I think it probably was evident. RoboCop, the 1987 version, nominated for 2 Oscars in 88, sound and film editing. It also won for sound effects editing. That's what it actually won for. And let's just fly through some of these facts here. RoboCop suit cost I think I read anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million. I don't think they just had one, but that it was so hot and heavy that Peter Weller actually was losing 3 pounds a day from water loss. So they eventually installed an air conditioner in the suit, which I guess for 1987, that's pretty impressive. He also didn't fit into the police car when he was wearing the full costume. So, of course, that's a problem. Many of the shots or scenes in the movie include him or involve him driving in his car. So when he needed to be in the car, he actually just wore the top part of the suit and he sat in his underwear. And I found this one interesting too. In Sacramento, California, a robbery suspect fled into a movie theater to escape pursuing police. This is while RoboCop was playing, and he became so engrossed in the movie, he failed to notice that police had evacuated all of the other patrons from the theater. And so when they turned the lights on, he was stunned and was taken into custody. I thought that was pretty funny.
There you go. RoboCop with a real arrest.
Exactly. There you go. Peter Weller was a method actor, or at least he came to set trying to use his method acting techniques. And so he would only answer Paul Verhoeven and the other cast members when they addressed him as Robo. I thought that was interesting. Given, I guess, the genre, this isn't, he's not making, you know what I mean? Like,
right. He's not Hamlet in this movie.
Right. And especially funny because my last that I wanted to share was apparently he was cast primarily for his being able to fit into the slim RoboCop suit and for his strong jawline, because that's obviously the portion of his body that's actually seen through the suit. They actually, I read that they didn't keep up with his method acting because they found it hilarious. But I think, ultimately they're like, Peter, this is weird. Like, we only cast you because of your strong jawline.
Because of the way you look.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that old, all the way back to the 30s where Joseph Cotton, he says, why do I get all the parts? Because I'm tall and I have good hair. And in this case, it's tall and he has a good jawline.
Exactly.
So.
All right, let's cover our favorite scene. I actually had to cut from this. We've done a few episodes or a couple episodes now of this podcast series, and I usually don't have more than a handful, like 8 to 10 scenes, something like that. I had nearly, I think, 17 or 18 scenes.
Oh yeah, no, there's
a lot.
Good. It's all the little stuff. I mean, you would talk about like my favorites. It's something that he does later in Starship Troopers too, where just these little clips, the news bits with, it's so 80s to me, the like using Lisa Gibbons as the news person, from Entertainment Tonight being your news person, and just the beautiful, lovely, the ads they do, the Nukem game, which is like Battleship with like 3D nuclear, the cars, the SUX 9000, because you're only getting 6.2 miles per gallon. And it has like the stop motion dinosaur with its eyes bugging out. All these weird little quirks add up. As much as you love stuff in the main story, there's all these side things that you're like, oh my God, the universe is so built up. And again, that's why it's so hard to pick favorite scenes. And I mean,
yeah, no, absolutely. No, I had all of those down to cut them all out, primarily to keep things moving, because we this would become a 3-hour episode. Right. So I'm just going to go through. I've cut it down. I did my best. These are kind of the pivotal scenes, I think, that move the story along. I've got 12 here, and this is cut down, as mentioned. So there's the demonstration and malfunction of Ed 209 at the OCP board meeting that results in Mr. Kinney's death, as well as, pivotally, the green lighting of Bob Morton's RoboCop program. We have Murphy's death, as we mentioned, one of the very violent moments in the film. The scene where Dick Jones confronts Bob Morton in the men's restroom. The quick note on this one is I love that they're trying to portray these really men, I guess, with ambitions and working for an evil corporation. And I think Dick Jones, at one point when he's threatening Bob Morton, calls him Buddy Boy. It's like, wait, was that supposed to be threatening? I guess maybe in 1987 terms that was, but it just doesn't match up with, they obviously had no problem going extremely violent, but apparently from a linguistic standpoint, Buddy Boy was really bad. We've got the gas station explosion where RoboCop is recognized by a member of Boddicker's crew. The scene where Boddicker takes out Bob Morton. This was a hit ordered by Dick Jones. Because of that men's restroom confrontation, we have the first fight between RoboCop and Boddicker's crew. We have the fight between Ed 209 and RoboCop, at least the first one. I want to come back to this point later when we end, but where basically RoboCop is able to escape and would have otherwise probably been destroyed by Ed 209. Except for the fact that Ed 209, it wasn't designed to go down flights of stairs.
which again leads to like some of the, that was on my list, the beautiful special effects where first it's sitting on the ground and its foot is twitching, which is this beautiful shot. And then it starts crying like a little baby. And it's just on its back crying like a little baby, which is just, it's so intense up to that point. You've got so much intense, and then it's just this ridiculous where it's like, this is like the perfect escape valve laugh for the crowd after you've been so intense for like 10, 15 minutes getting there. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, we have where the police essentially turn on RoboCop and they are attacking him. I want to come back to that. It kind of related to the Ed 209 scene with the first fight. I want to come back to that later, but I actually thought this was sort of poignant. There's the scene where RoboCop removes his helmet. His partner Lewis is helping him. They're sort of gearing up for the final fight, and he removes his helmet and sees himself for the first time. He sees his own face as Murphy, but he's RoboCop now, and Murphy's dead. So I thought that was a nice scene. There's the final fight, the pivotal final fight scene between RoboCop and all of Boddicker's crew, including where he takes out Boddicker, which, as we mentioned, this scene, as a kid, I didn't mention this earlier, but in terms of Boddicker's, just how that his death being so violent, that spike that comes out of RoboCop's fist, which he uses, I guess, as a kind of like the way R2-D2 in Star Wars, connects to a computer. And when he puts that into Boddicker's face, and I saw that, like I said, at age 8 or whatever it was, that stuck with me for a long time.
I believe it. It's extremely visceral, and they shoot the blood everywhere. It's And again, we're back to, like we've had just before that, the cartoonish violence, which was one of my scenes of Emil, who's been deformed by by radioactive waste, so he's melting and gets hit by a car blows up in like a grotesquely silly effect. Only moments later to have this, which is a very visceral, very personal, violent attack and death for the villain. I mean, you're on one sense, you're like, there's a lot of redemption and feeling in it to how Murphy feels, but at the same time, it's so graphic and so like, wow, in your face.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it in the moment, I guess if you're an audience member, I think what they were going for, right, is, I mean, this Boddicker is the leader of this gang that was responsible for Murphy's death when he was still a human, before they turned him into RoboCop, and he was a police officer. And I mean, it's as a result of his murder, right? The way they killed him. I mean, he lost his entire family, right? We learn it throughout the movie. I think they might touch on this in the sequel, in the second one, but his wife has moved on. I mean, everything's gone. His wife and child have moved on without him.
Yeah, because there was a scene in this one where he goes to the house and the house is empty, and there's like the pictures from the family are burned. He finds like the burned Polaroid in the future.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, is that a callback to like the first Terminator movie? Is kind of a joke because that's the picture that they have in that. That's the burned photo that he's in love with them, and now it's like, oh, I've got a burned picture here too. Because that kind of the future was burned pictures in the 80s.
Right. Yeah, no, I had that home visit scene. I had to cut it because there was just too much, too many scenes. But yeah, I mean, quick, just side note on Terminator. I think just Peter Weller's career. I mean, other than this, and I think he was in a couple of other movies like Leviathan, Michael Biehn in Terminator. I mean, it's sort of, you know him. I know him, I guess, not you, but I know him just from this movie, and I think it was Leviathan.
Yeah, he's in Leviathan. For that, younger for me, a couple years before that, he's in one of my favorite called Goofy movies. He's in Buckaroo Banzai, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, which is really culty science fiction, and was caught up in I can't remember, not Orion or maybe TriStar, somebody's bankruptcy. So the sequels were never made to that too. It was a minor hit, and it kind of put Peter Weller as a science fiction sort of star again, sort of that semi-pre-boy, but still kind of rough, edgy science fiction hero. And I mean, you'd throw somebody like Michael Paré in that, all these people that were big in the 80s that kind of had that period of 3 or 4 years and then disappeared off to more character actor.
Yeah, no, I mean, Michael Bihn's the same way, right? I mean, he was in the Alien franchise with Sigourney Weaver, and then he was in Terminator with Arnold, and then I didn't see him again until
he has like a 5-minute bit in The Rock. He's like he gets
that's right.
He's a Marine for
that's
like 5 minutes that leads the failed attack. You say, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm tough. I'm Michael Biehn. I'm tough, and he walks in and gets killed immediately. And you're like, well, that was kind of a weird use of Michael Biehn.
I mean, because 8 years prior to that, right? 8 or 10 years prior to that, I mean, he's in these in a very prominent role. Yeah, he's a star. So anyway, this Peter Weller reminds me of that of him in that way. And then my final scene I have is RoboCop takes out Dick Jones. He kills him in another board meeting. I mean, these dangerous board meetings here at OCP. I know it's tough to choose, and you probably would choose more than one, but let's for the sake of time, we'll keep it to just one.
We've gone through them. We've talked a lot about them. I mean, I really think that I would go with the one that you hit on was with the Ed 209 and RoboCop confrontation where it's on the stairs. It's all the things you love in movies. It's beautiful practical effects with the robot moving and the foot twitching. It's got some great act with Peter Weller there where we talk about this. Yeah, it's the jawline, but he gives you real character in the way he moves and gives you in a silent performance a great performance there for that. So I think that would be really one of my number one scenes. And then just for the goofiness of it, when in the first car chase, just before they shoot up Murphy, there's this beautiful scene when one of the guys been shot. He's like, I'm hurt, Clarence. We got to get me to the doctor. And he opens the back of the truck and he looks at him and goes, can you fly, Bobby? And he just throws him through the windshield of the police car behind him. And it's like 80s excess, it's 80s goofiness, and yet it's really weird and violent at the same time. It's like this almost a perfect encapsulation of what the movie is like, here we are in violent Detroit. Here we are in a violent United States. The end. You
probably hit on what Verhoeven was going for in that Ed 209 RoboCop first fight. I want to come back to that, like I said, at the end. For me, I agree with what you're saying. I think artistically, for me, it hit me in a way that I think maybe was not rewatching as an adult. I think maybe not as positive. But yeah, I think and it's not my favorite because of I think I think it is very violent. So it's not the reason why it's my favorite, but I think it's because it sort of grabs your attention right from the start of the movie. Like, okay, I think it sets the stage for everything that follows in terms of, like you mentioned, the over-the-top violence, just sort of the style, but also some of the visceral, kind of in-your-face, very realistic, gritty parts of the violence too. Just the Ed 209 demonstration and the malfunction resulting in Mr. Kinney's death. I mean, I think if you're watching it up until that point, you kind of don't really know, right? And other than they show some montages of some violence in the city, you don't really see up close yet what this movie is how they're going to approach these topics. And when you see that and the way that Mr. Kinney gets shot repeatedly, I think someone responds by saying, like, I think we need to call 911.
We need to call HR or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not even 911. We got to call HR. You know?
Yeah, they had already moved on in a way. So I think it punctuates, again, the evil corporation idea. I would normally call this next category my potential planning opportunities category, where, we kind of launch into a more legal and substantive discussion. Given where we're headed and what you and I are going to discuss and what we work on together, as I mentioned, we work on a lot of compliance for closely held legal entities. I changed the name of this for this episode to be potential filing obligations instead of potential planning opportunities. So I thought what we would do, we're going to focus on is OCP and just the corporation as a type of legal entity and some of the filings that go with that. In particular, what happens when you have board members and directors and officers needing to be replaced, because obviously in this film, we know that OCP in a short span of time loses 3 of their very key executives in Mr. Kinney, Bob Morton, and Dick Jones, because they are disposed of and killed throughout the movie. So what I want to see is, before we get into that, quickly go over the common types of legal entities. So we're not going to have time to go into any of these in any great amount of detail, but there's a number of different ways that a company can be organized. And so there's a sole proprietorship. There are partnerships. These are more than one person, whereas a sole proprietorship is just a single person doing business. Partnerships, you have more than one person, and they are generally, there's a general partnership as well as a limited partnership. There's also, and probably what we see more often than not for the private clients in our at our firm, we have LLCs or limited liability companies. And we have a corporation. There's a C Corp and there's an S Corp. There's more than that. But again, we're just going to kind of focus on corporation as a whole in general. The distinctions between these types generally focus on the number of permissible owners. How many owners can there be? As I mentioned already, a sole proprietorship is 1 versus a partnership needs to have at least 2 or more people. The liability exposure of the owners. So if you're an owner, what your level of personal liability is to liabilities and debts of the company itself. And then again, this is in broad strokes, but how the entity is taxed, right? So for income tax purposes or other tax purposes, how is this entity treated? Is it taxed separately? Is it a pass-through entity? Those are the kind of the common distinctions between them. With the exception of a sole proprietorship and general partnership from the list that I gave, these entities need to register with the Secretary of State in whatever state that company is doing business in or is being formed in. And so that's a great segue. We're going to be looking at a corporation in general, but I want to do it by looking at OCP, which stands for Omni Consumer Products. It is the sort of bad mega corporation of this film. I initially had a list, and I don't know if you know or can summarize this quickly. Probably you can, because your love for the movie, but I had a list of all the things that OCP was trying to do. It was in every facet of...
Right. Dick Jones at one point says that all of this has military implications, so we can sell it to the military no matter what they're doing. Which is like the end of that. He's like, yeah, here's our home security. Here's our space satellites. Here's this. Here's our RoboCop. Here's our Ed 209. And all of it we can sell to the military. That's why he's angry at Bob Morton later, because you've ruined my military contracts with the Ed 209. And it's they've got this whole list of like subsidiary products that they're all doing that they've got. It's kind of like, I think of some of the megacorps, Japanese ones like Mitsubishi, where, we make phones, we make televisions, and we make cars. It's like we have everything. It's like, and I think that's where we go with the Omni. It's like all encompassing. This is Omni Consumer Products. We make everything that you need to consume. It's like, it's subtle and yet not subtle. Going to James Cameron, since we've talked about him, it's like the unobtainium in Avatar. It's so obvious in its name, and yet it works.
Yeah. So looking at OCP, we have, let's just quickly go through, and if you don't mind, just sharing, what are some primary features of a corporation? So
corporation is set up. We can set it up either as stock or non-stock, which would be if you've got a non-stock corporation, it's just people that own it directly. That's more uncommon. A stock one, people have that, and we can have it a private or non-private. A private stock corporation is like family members only that own it, versus a non-private, a public stock corporation, which is what we see traded on the stock exchange, traded on the NASDAQ. And it has there are more public facing things you need to do with that, but still the basics are the same. You have to, like we noticed, we have to form in some state. This was done in the 80s. So at that time, probably, even though they're based in Michigan, they probably would have formed in Delaware. That would have been the premise. Even now, that's sort of the state that has the best protections for a corporation. That's what the state derives a lot of its money from. As a smaller state, they're sort of a business haven. So you would set up your company and file your articles of incorporation there. And then obviously they have, as we see all these shots of ravaged Detroit, obviously they're based in Michigan. They have an office in Michigan. So they would have to register with the state of Michigan. And, presumably if they're the way they talk about being, global, presumably they have office satellites across the country, like they would have one here in California. So you would register your company here in California too, because you have a physical office here and you're doing business here. So any state where you have sort of a physicality, you would register from that. So I think that would be your basics. And with that, the articles of incorporation are fairly standard for a corporation. You would just lay out your basics of, okay, here's the name, here's how we've set up to have officers. This is our purposes, any legal under the laws of Delaware. And if it's a stock corporation, you would set up then, we have Class A stock, Class B stock, how many certificates we could have in total.
Yeah, I think you name your registered agent as well under the
Correct.
Document. Yeah.
It's fairly basic, and then it refers back to more internal documents like your bylaws, which would set up then how your board how shareholders would set up your board, how your board, what authority your board would have, how the board would set up officers, or whether the shareholders need to set up the board. So you've got a top level that's with the state, and then a second level that's internal to do day-to-day operations.
Yeah, that's a great summary. And as we mentioned, or as I mentioned earlier, there's limited liability, so shareholders are not personally liable for the company's debts. A corporation can exist in perpetuity. So even if the owners die or they're no longer around, the corporation itself can continue. And then for tax purposes, as I mentioned, it's a separate entity. So it's not a pass-through entity for income tax purposes like some of the other types that we talked about earlier, or at least mentioned earlier. Within a corporation, of course, like OCP, you have roles, and generally that's divided between a board of directors. These are broad definitions, but governing body of the corporation, they're responsible for, major business decisions and policy, kind of big picture stuff, the vision of the company. And we'll go into this first. There's also the executive officers, who I think the average person and everybody's going to they've heard of these terms, right? CEO, COO. We'll go through that in a second. But for the board of directors, let's focus on Mr. Kinney. I mean, poor Mr. Kinney. He shows up to work on the wrong day, should have called in sick.
He's like the only person excited to go to the board meeting too, which makes it, everybody else is like another day in the office. And he's like, "Ooh, they're going to do something new. This is exciting."
Yeah. Poor Mr. Kinney. I hope he had his estate plan in place. We could have used that. We could have used that as a segue to talk about some estate planning. So Mr. Kinney, they don't give you much on him, right? I mean, he's only on screen for a few minutes. I think, looking online and doing some research, he's supposed to be a member. Obviously, he's got a seat at the board meeting, so we know he's some type of executive. They say that he's a member of the executive board. My understanding of an executive board is it's a sort of smaller subset of the larger board of directors, and they, again, still related to overseeing activities with respect to strategic planning and decision making for the company. Any thoughts on Mr. Kinney about,
No, I mean, right. When we were talking about putting things into the bylaws, often we would do that. We would say the board of directors can set up like an executive committee underneath that. Some of them have more specific titles, and you have like maybe an investment or financial one that meets separately to do that. And then they will do all the day-to-day ops of like, oh, here's this project, and then bring the final papers to the board for approval. So an executive committee and executive board like that would be like a subset that would do more day-to-day or more specific things so that the board isn't caught up in the minutia every day.
Exactly. And speaking of day-to-day, that'll kind of get us to our next set of characters here. We've got executive officers. Officers are appointed by the board, generally responsible for carrying out the board's policies. And as you mentioned, managing some of the day-to-day operations of the company so that the board's not caught up in all these small decisions and minutiae, as you mentioned. So Bob Morton, let's climb the corporate ladder, so to speak. So we start with Bob Morton. I think he started out, it sounds like, because we know that he's promoted to vice president in the midst of the film because of the success, or at least the initial success of the RoboCop program. He sort of pounces when Ed 209, which we should mention is Dick Jones's baby. maybe literal baby if you count the stair scene where the Ed 209's crying. But Bob Morton pounces on that Ed 209 malfunction in the board meeting and basically pushes his RoboCop program forward. As a result, he's promoted to vice president. So he's vice president as far as we know. I think he probably before this, and you and I kind of touched on this before, but maybe it sounds like he was sort of equivalent or equal to Mr. Kinney, at least prior to his promotion.
Right. They seem to be on certainly the same level in that they don't always get, Mr. Kinney's excited because they as a team don't always get involved going to the full board meetings like this. So I have a feeling, they're more sort of a subsidiary executive committee with executive and their vice president at that level, or whatever titles they've given them. And then, Bob gets promoted to executive vice president. He's moved up from a simple vice president, simple part of the board, to a more senior officer. We see that where he gets, again, we were talking about the bathroom scene where all of a sudden he gets a key to the executive bathroom, the executive washroom that he hadn't had before. So right. How exciting. Again, that seems pretty 80s too. I don't really think of that as a corporate perk in the
I don't think that's not a selling point anymore, I'm afraid. He's executive vice president. As we said, let's move on. Let's go one. I don't know if it's one rung up or if it's multiple rungs up, but we have Dick Jones.
Yeah, and Dick is president, senior president.
He's senior president as far as I could tell.
Okay. Yeah. We'll go back to when you file your articles and what the state, irrespective of what state you're in, there are certain titles, certain positions that have to be filled to make it a corporation. So you have to have a president. You have to have the CFO, or a treasurer, depending on how it's state to state or how you want to do it. And then you have to have a secretary. And again, this isn't like the traditional of a secretary that like an administrative assistant, but what a corporate secretary does is responsible for taking the minutes at actual meetings, making sure everything is caught up and put down. Again, especially if even if you're a private corporation, privately owned, but especially as a public corporation, so the minutes are what's going to dictate and what comes out to the public. The public can ask for those kind of things to see what happened at a board meeting, unless it's explicitly said that it's going to be a private meeting. And again, that always has issues with it too when you think about it with a public corporation. But the secretary is really responsible for the back end paperwork at the top level. They're the ones that's going to sign off on the meeting minutes. I don't want to be the secretary that signed off on the meeting minutes when Mr. Kinney has his run in with the Ed 209, or even later when Dick Jones has his run in with RoboCop. These are messy meeting minutes, but that's something that has to be taken care of. We on our side, on the compliance side, both for our nonprofit foundations, which are also corporations, and for a public corporation, we're like at least at a minimum, you have to meet annually. You have to have these minutes, and anytime you have the board together, really you need to record and have an actual set down written of what happened at those meetings to really be in super compliance with things. I mean, sadly, we see that all the time where that's how corporations get in trouble, where they don't have their minutes in place. They don't have what they told people they were doing in place. So
shout out to Ronnie Cox, who plays Dick Jones. I always knew him. Really, I guess I remember him most from the Beverly Hills Cop. He played the police chief, I think, in Beverly Hills. But yeah, good. I guess he did this probably, I think, before. I'm not sure if this predate. This might predate.
No, it's in between, like the second and the third, I think.
Yeah.
And then he does sort of the same thing in some other movies that way. He becomes this beautiful 80s, like, corporate villain with that. He's got that face. He's got that kind of weird, kind of Texasy twangy to his voice. Yeah. And it's perfect. You're like, he's so officious.
Yeah. So as you summed up, he's senior president. And I think like most of these, sort of the smaller subset or the smaller roles, as you get away from the top, you're dealing with more. And quite frankly, I mean, senior president obviously is pretty close to the top, but but he's under the CEO, which we'll get to in just a second. And so he's focusing on the day-to-day execution of the CEO's strategies and sort of the minutia that CEO probably doesn't have time to deal with. And we should get to the CEO, who is our final character that we're kind of taking a look at on this ladder. It's the old man. Doesn't even get a name.
Nope, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Everybody knows who he is. It's
It's just the old man. He is the CEO, chief executive officer, who presumably he oversees all operations. And I guess I should mention, and you would know more than me, but in general, can officers also be members of the board or a director?
Yeah, usually we'd have that written specifically into like the bylaws that board members, directors can also serve as officers. We usually have that written specifically into that, and none of the states really have an exclusion from that. Some of them have an exclusion that you can't have multiple titles, like you can't be the president and the treasurer both. It depends on, again, the size and how it's set up. But certainly we have that on the nonprofit side where there's some where you're not allowed to have be all three positions because, again, it has sort of an oversight of not being there. That's one of the, again, we're talking about liability for corporations and such. It causes sort of some issues with the liability and with transparency if someone is all three of the positions. That's
right. And we've got, just to round this out, I mean, there's so many different titles that you can have, but some of the more common ones that, we generally hear about or see and encounter is with companies that we're doing work for our private clients. Chief Operating Officer, so COO, Chief Financial Officer, CFO, Chief Technology Officer, which back CTO. So I don't know that in the 80s whether OCP would have had a CTO. Maybe. I mean, even then, the COO's Chief Operating Officer, even those are relatively newer to the vocabulary of how you set things up. But if they're, again, nowadays that's much more common and things we would have put up on a board or on an officers beyond just the traditional three. In information officers too, you have like a CIO, Chief Informational Officer nowadays too, especially with you and I we're recording this literally like 1,000 miles from each other, looking at each other on a screen. That's tech that wasn't, even that isn't contemplated in RoboCop, which was supposed to be in the future, like how that tech is, you and I, we had security training here with our CIO not that long ago. Right. So, right. I think you mentioned this role earlier, but there's a secretary who's responsible for administrative tasks as well as record keeping, meeting minutes. Gosh, the meeting minutes. So OCP, what we wanted to focus on after going through these roles is what happens when three of your senior executives are in I don't know, how long do you think the movie, what time span does it take place in? Like a few months or several months?
Yeah, I want to say that from Mr. Kinney getting killed to when they have RoboCop actually operational, I want to say somewhere along the line that Bob Morton says it's taken them like 6 months to get to that because they get Murphy a couple weeks later, they say, and then all the time to fix him up and to put him into programming. So I want to say it's been 6 or 7 months between when Mr. Kinney dies to when the primary action takes place, where RoboCop hooks in, and then Bob and Dick have their squabbles, but then from there it seems relatively quick from where since we're going to talk about these anyways, from where Bob is killed by Clarence and his people to where then Dick Jones has his big moment in the board of directors office. It seems like it's maybe been a week at the most there. So it seems to the time suddenly telescopes from like, boom, everything is happening now, immediate. There's not like, there's maybe a couple, it's another night, but not like this, it's a couple months later. It seems very instantaneous when that happens.
Yeah. So someone at OCP, as we mentioned earlier, the filings that need to be
right.
need to be updated.
So there are filings and there are internal paperwork. Both we talked about the minutes and we'll talk about the filings here too. So I don't envy the secretary that had to take the meeting minutes when Mr. Kinney was killed, because you've got to do that. And then after that, depending on, especially when we see a senior officer like Dick Jones at the end, they need to be replaced. It's a position that needs to be filled. So on that side, internally, you would be rather than have another board meeting, we set up the bylaws and all the states allow this. You're allowed to do like what we call unanimous written consent of the board. And it's a resolution that they've all signed, and it has like the code section. There's a Delaware code section that says, pursuant to Delaware code section, blah, 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 and the bylaws, in lieu of meeting in person, all the board members agree to this. And that's where you would replace an officer. You could do it that way rather than have another board meeting in an election. And you and I were laughing about this because with that, you need to sort of explain. It's not like, oh, Bob Morton didn't resign. Dick Jones didn't resign. They were deceased, to put it politely. And you and I had this, though, where it came up this summer with one of our clients where we did have a president pass on. And in the minutes, we needed to, in this resolution, rather, to qualify that, we put that was the reason we were replacing them.
That's right.
We said that this person died on such and such a date. Therefore, the position needs to be replaced. And, a new person has to be put in place effective this date. So, on one level, yes, it's kind of grotesque why they're doing it here, but it's something that's all too common. Hans may be living forever, but I'm not going to live forever, so I will need to be replaced at some point, So that's sort of where we go with this, that there has to be a place you have to put in a why, because otherwise we would have to have like resignation letters put in if someone simply resigned. So that was what you would do on an internal level. So again, you've got this corporate secretary. They've got minutes where Mr. Kinney was killed and all the Ed 209 fiasco. And again, if they're publicly traded, I think they mentioned something about how they think the company's going to tank and lose money too in the public because they can't have the Ed 209 out. That's going to show up on their it's going to show up on their 10Ks too at some point. God, I didn't even think of that until just now. But then after that, I don't think Mr. Kinney was high enough up where he would need to have like a resolution to replace him. These are more under things. But by that same token, they promote Bob Morton up to an executive vice president. So there would need to be an internal resolution there that said, oh, he's been promoted. It wouldn't necessarily need to have a why here. It's just, oh, here we've opened up a new position. Here he is. But then when he passes away, again, if they're going to put someone in that position as an executive president, again, they wouldn't need to do minutes because he gets killed off screen. He at least manages to not get killed at a board meeting, which makes him kind of unusual for an executive in this movie. But his position would need to be replaced. And then obviously the biggest one is Dick Jones, where at the meeting, again, this is something that after that, this position would really need to be filled. And there would need to be a board resolution replacing him as the president.
It's good to point out, too. I mean, these are their positions at the company, which are completely separate from perhaps whatever ownership interest they may have in the company. So we talked earlier about filings with the Secretary of State. Let's just presume here that OCP is both registered in Michigan as well as Delaware. I think they've got to update their statement of information, correct? Because it's
so in Delaware. But again, we're talking about Delaware is used because of its privacy. So March 1st of every year in Delaware, you have to file an annual report. It's not public, and so it won't be seen anywhere else, but it has to name all of your directors, and it has to name at least one officer that will be nominally the signer off on it, the president, the secretary, or the treasurer. One of those three will need to be identified and signed. They don't have any obligations to update during the year. It's just a once a year. Michigan, same thing. They have an annual report that names all the officers and directors. So you would have to name, but again, the officers that want you to name are the president, the secretary, and the treasurer, or CFO, depending on how you have that named. So you've got all your directors and all those three that need to be named. And with their annual report, you don't need to. They don't have a mechanism. You can amend it, but you're not obligated to. That's different from where you and I here, we talked about they probably have an LA office or a San Francisco office, so they're registered in California. In California, if a director or any of those named officers, the president, secretary, treasurer, if any of those do change, in theory, you're supposed to file within 30 days. The state doesn't to note that change. It's the statement of information is done online. You go boop, boop, boop. You even have to note on theirs if there's vacancy on the board of directors. I actually had a statement of information here in California just last week where the client had done it themselves and they had marked that there were vacancies on the board. And when I looked at it, I said, no, we need to refile this to make sure, because you don't have any vacancies on the board, and you don't want that in the public seeing that your company has vacancies if they don't. And so again, with that, you need to update every time. So in theory, again here, Mr. Kinney wouldn't have been on your California statement of information. He's not a high enough officer. You can name executive vice presidents or vice presidents. You don't have to on the Statement of Information in California. So Bob may or may not have. But Dick, as the president, obviously we're going to have to file within 30 days of him passing away here in the state of California too. Not in Michigan, not in Delaware. Delaware will come up March 1st. We'll just say, oh, here's the president. Now, if we want him, he may or may not have been signing it anyway, so he may not have been on there. And then we'll just update our Michigan annual report at that time. Theirs is, I can't remember when theirs are due. I think theirs is tied, like the California Statement of Information, to their formation, their registry dates. Those are slightly different. It varies state to state when your mandatory annual report is set. So
it sounds like someone at OCP is going to be making multiple filings here.
Yes, their paper guy has been very active the past few months.
Yeah. And I thought it would be good to at least talk about also as our final substantive topic, the Corporate Transparency Act. OCP is going to have some filing, it sounds like, some obligations under the CTA as well.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to first do a brief recap of the Corporate Transparency Act. We covered that fairly extensively in the John Wick episode with Farella business transactions partner Greg Lasaint. We go through the act there and its purpose and kind of what the general filing obligations are, as well as some common exceptions. But basically, it's a federal law that requires certain entities to disclose information about their beneficial owners to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is FinCEN. FinCEN is a bureau of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Broadly speaking, its objective is to safeguard the financial system from illicit activity. As we talked about in that other episode, there is something called a Beneficial Ownership Information Report, a BOI report that needs to be filed that essentially discloses who your beneficial owners of a certain, of your entity or your company are. Does OCP need to update its BOI report in light of what happened tragically to Mr. Kinney, Bob Morton, and Dick Jones?
You and I were talking about this before we started recording. The owner part of beneficial owner is kind of a misnomer because it's not necessarily physically owning stock or owning that. It's also if you have a managerial or controlling aspect. Best practices at a minimum means that's your president, that's your treasurer, that's your corporate secretary. At a minimum, those three should be named. And then anybody else that's on any director should be named as well. The directors, because they have a control of what the company does. We talk about parsing that in that. But in this sense, at a minimum, Dick Jones, his death would trigger an update to the report. At this point, they filed their initial report because it's past the due date. You do that, you guys talked about the deadlines. By the future, where RoboCop is, all companies would have had to have registered. So you can then file either a correction or an update. In this sense, it would be a correction if like you spelled somebody's name wrong or something silly like that. But here, in terms of it's an update because your president has been replaced. So you wouldn't, as soon as you do that resolution internally to replace Dick Jones and have a new president, then your 30-day clock starts ticking on the other side to file an updated report with the BOI. We see Bob Morton get moved up to being an executive vice president and having a place in the bigger table. That would be an internal discussion whether that executive vice president would be someone, though, that had more direct control that would fall under the beneficial ownership rubric. That's been a lot of math this year of thinking about, even if you don't own it, who the officer is, who needs to be really reported in this. Like I said, that's why best practices at a minimum is the director, the president, the treasurer, and the secretary. But we've had a couple where we've had vice presidents that were not ownership, but say like part of a family that used to own it that still had an actual say in how things were done. So that vice president we also said, well, then you should have this vice president be part of the report as well. So that would be this. And again, as we go into RoboCop 2 and the old man passes away, I hope no spoilers, RoboCop 2, the old man doesn't survive that one, then he would need to be replaced on the report as well as a board of directors and as the CEO in his position there. The background on this, and I think you and Greg might have touched on this, is that you don't have to put why these people are. I don't have to put, because he's the president, because he owns 25% of the stock. They just need to be named. So if Bob was already on there as a vice president and he got promoted to president, I wouldn't have to update my report because he's already on the report. So it's actual control issues. It's not tied to titles or that type of thing. So I think that would be the easiest way to say that. So watching this, we've got maybe 2 filings with the Secretary of State in California 2 updates, one update with Delaware and one update with Michigan, the next annual report, and at least one BOI report from all the shenanigans here.
Yeah. No, that's, again, OCP's got some work to do. And this is what happens when you have lively board meetings. I thought it would be a good opportunity to share just the latest CTA update. Basically, if an entity is dissolved prior to 2024, there's no need to file a BOI report. But if an entity existed at any point during 2024, then it must file a BOI report, even if it is dissolved before the filing deadline. Is that right?
Correct. We had a couple which we've been doing where we'd put things off, and because the filing date, we wanted to do it at the end of December, and it didn't get filed till one of them got filed literally January 4th of this year. They still have to do their BOI report because they existed from the 1st to the 3rd. And so if the dissolution was not affected by the state that of where it was formed before December 31st, 2023, then you'd still need to file a report. We did a couple, like I said, we did one that we dissolved in January, and I did another one last week where we talked to them and confirmed that they were going to file one for an entity that we dissolved February 1st. So yes, we've started to go back and call and make sure that that's aware to all of our clients and that they need to file the BOI reports for those as well.
Let's get to our final category, the verdict. Is it a guilty pleasure or not guilty? Guilty is you enjoyed the movie but feel guilty about it for any reason. Not guilty, you either disliked the movie or loved it, so it cannot possibly be a guilty pleasure. What is it for you? I think I know, but what is it?
Okay, I would say that Teenage Joe, who when he first saw it in the theaters and then was bootlegging copies, it was definitely, even as a big hit, it seemed like a guilty pleasure. It seemed like it was underground, it was rough, it was anti-societal. You know, we were punk rock kids in the 80s, and it was kind of a punk rock movie. This is like, ooh, this is in your face. It's violent. We hate the government. We hate corporations. It's all evil. So it had kind of that guilty of like, even as a mainstream movie, it's like, oh no, this is talking to us. This is like what's really going on out there. It's underground. I would say now, oh, it's totally a real pleasure now. You look at it, I mean, having a much bigger look at like the effects, you look at what it really says about society. As an adult, you're like, no, this is really good satire. At the same time, it's really good drama too. You've got like you said, there's such this heartfelt sequences where you see what Murphy has lost, that again, just using the lower part of his jaw and his mouth, how effective so much of Peter Weller's performance is to affect some pathos in that. It's got some real genuine emotion in it, which is really nice, and I think makes it a real pleasure.
So you went basically from guilty to not guilty.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I ultimately stay not guilty the whole way, but I was going to zag on you and say that this is now a guilty pleasure. Because as a kid, I had I did completely enjoyed the movie as a kid, and clearly it left a mark, and I had a lot of memories about this as a franchise in my childhood. It was not guilty then. Rewatching it, I acknowledge everything you just said. And as a lover of movie history and sci-fi movies in general, a lot of Paul Verhoeven's, the movies that he's directed, I think I still ultimately stay not guilty just because of the place that this takes or has in again, sort of the larger canon of movies. But this is going to sound small, but what I can't get over is that RoboCop's walk or his gait for an action movie hero,
He's so slow.
Yeah, I understand. There were probably some real physical limitations, right, to the suit. I mean, he really was in that suit. These were practical effects, not CGI. But the fact that, like during that scene when the police turn on him and they're shooting him basically to bits, it's solely because he can't walk away or run away.
He's fairly slowly walking away. He falls down to climb under the thing. It's corporate thinking. He's really not much better designed than Ed 209, unfortunately. That's, we're talking about he's twitchy foot, slow legs. They haven't worked out the mobility in either of these yet. He's the prototype that needs better legs.
That was my other thing, and that's why I called out the scene, the first fight scene with them is, you want me to believe that these are cutting edge creations, that they're going to really do a lot of damage, and in RoboCop's case, they're both being heralded as law enforcement tools. Right. Ed 209 gets defeated by a flight of stairs. RoboCop is basically, gallivanting around, throughout the entire movie with something between a power walk and when my kids are hanging onto my legs and you're trying to trudge through the living
trying
room.
To keep on going.
Yeah, I mean, I can suspend my disbelief quite a bit. That was a little bit hard to get over. So, but
that leads to one of those other funny scenes where we're talking about all the perfect little parts when they have him on the TV and he's walking like that, and all the little kids at the school are walking behind him, mimicking the way he's walking.
Yeah, no, but ultimately, I will say, again, for the place that this movie has in movie history or sci-fi movie history, I want to say not guilty. But what we learned today is that even if you run a mega corporation like OCP and your goal is world domination, you should make sure that you are in compliance with the Secretary of State, as well as the Corporate Transparency Act, particularly if you have changes to your directors and officers. Joe, thanks so much for joining me today. This one was a lot of fun. I think our 10-year-old selves would be thrilled to know that we found a way to work RoboCop into our adult lives.
That's it. It was great. I'm glad you had me on, Hans. I can't wait. Now we got to find another movie. We're not going to do RoboCop 2. We got to find something.
Deal. We'll do it. I'm Hans Young with my guest, Farella Senior Paralegal Joe Hilliard, and you've been listening to The Verdict, Estate Planning Through Film, brought to you by the Private Client Group at Farella, Braun & Martel. Thanks so much for joining us, and keep watching movies.